Good evening, everyone. I am Olga Campofreda, Honorary Research Fellow at University College London, and I am going to say a quick introduction about our seminar series, especially focusing on the research questions that pushed us to work on this project. So in 1999, the pop star Christina Aguilera, just out of her first experience in the Mickey Mouse Club, released a song called What a Girl Wants, interpreting verses composed by a much older writer. Whatever keeps me in your arms, she used to sing to a hypothetical lover. Today, more than 20 years later, we enter the very lively season for girlhood studies, and thanks to new academic contribution and analysis, we are able to distinguish not only what girls wanted in a specific decade, but also why they wanted it and who told them to want it. So understood first as a liminal concept, a connection between childhood and womanhood, girlhood gained more space and autonomy with the rising of mass society and the recent introduction of social media. More and more girls pass from being the object of their own representation to the very subject of it. The social changes that occurred in the 70s in Western societies invited us to rethink the very idea of womanhood, but how the concept of girlhood evolved is yet to be fully addressed. We worked on the program of this seminar series having in mind very specific research questions. Our aim is to start a discourse around possible answers from different perspectives and disciplines. So the first question is, how does modern and contemporary culture frame the concept of female adolescence? How and to what extent these representations align or oppose political, religious, and educational institutions? How and to what extent mass consumerism and new media contribute to creating ideal models of girlhoods? And the final questions, last but not least, how women's self-narratives in literature and journalism, film and TV help superseding white heteronormative models of girlhood. So these are just a few questions that we aim to answer in the following weeks. We hope that you will be with us until the very first round table in which we are going to discuss, as Federica mentioned, we're going to discuss the main approaches touched by this series of seminars. Now I'm going to introduce our speakers, finally, the speakers of our first talk. So Romana Andò is Associate Professor at Sapienza University of Rome. Since 2018, she is the head of the International Master Program in Fashion Studies. Her research interests are audience and fandom studies, celebrity culture, fashion consumption, girlhood studies. She authored many articles, books, chapters, and a book on her topic of interest, among the others, Audience for Fashion, Consumare Moda nei media e con I media. Danielle Hipkins is a professor of Italian Studies and Film at University of Exeter. She has published widely on gender representation in post-war Italian cinema, and recent articles include Figlie di Papà, Adolescent Girls Between the Incest Motive and Female Friendship in Contemporary Italian Film Comedy. She was a co-investigator for the AHRC-funded project Italian Cinema Audiences, and since February 2021, she has been a principal investigator of the AHRC-funded project A Girl's Eye View, Girlhood on the Italian screen since 1950s, together with Romana Andò, for which she continues a research on relationship between gender and generation in consumption of Italian cinema and television. So today we mainly focus on Italian cinema and the representation of girlhood. I am very, very happy to welcome our speakers on our virtual stage. So.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Olga, Federica, and Shirley to inviting us. And yes, thank you, Danielle, for sharing the slides. I will start with our presentation. I would like to say just something before starting about our goals and in particular about the way we started this collaboration. because as scholars in different fields, as you may understand from our presentation, you mentioned it before, I'm a researcher in audience studies mainly, and Danielle is a professor in Italian studies. So what we did was to starting this collaboration, focusing on the same topic, girlhood, from different perspective. And we started this collaboration, which is maybe the key word of our research. I mean, collaboration is the fil rouge of our research, as it involves a series of people, of course, the girls we are interviewing for our research, but also other academic scholars in the network we have created in order to discuss and to present research about the same topic. We have involved also, of course, teachers in the schools, but also female professionals in the field of Italian media production. So what I like to emphasize in this moment is that this is the first result we are going to share with you are the result of a collaboration, first of all, and then of a research. The starting point of our research is, was of course, this is the project team, of course, and is made by me, La Sapienza, Leonardo Campagna, La Sapienza, PhD student, and Danielle Hipkins and Maria Elena Lampi, at the University of Exeter. And of course, we have a series of collaborators, of young researchers who participate in the different steps of the research. Starting from the goals of our project, the general goal, we may say, is to analyze girlhood representation in Italian film and TV series. And what we would like to understand is how the representation of girlhood are built in the movies in Italy, starting from the 50s. And of course, what we have decided to add during the process of writing the project and in the very first months of our project, the goal was also enlarged in order to consider also TV series, because of the extraordinary success that TV shows are gaining also in Italy in terms of representation of girlhood and in terms of teen audiences. The second goal is to understand, to investigate the modalities of teen girls self-construction in Italy. So what we are doing, thanks to our research in the field, I mean, the interviews, focus groups that we did in with the girls in different schools in Italy. We have involved 6 schools in 6 high schools, of course, in various parts of Italy, from north to south, from small villages to big cities, in order to have a group of students who can represent also the diversity in my country, in Italy. And what we are collecting in terms of first results is, of course, this relationship between girlhood representation in Italian films and TV series, but also we are investigating the way teen girls are building every day their identity through different tools and different devices, also considering, of course, social media, but also thanks to the relationship they have every day with their friends, with teachers, with parents, etc. The third goal of our research is related to the topic of relatability between girlhood media representation and the actual experience of girls in Italy. So what we want to understand is if there is a correspondence between the way Girlhood is represented in television and cinema, with the representation of girlhood and adolescence in general. Girls are living and experiencing every day in their life. So what we asked is if they recognize themselves, if they are able to appropriate this content in order to find a useful reflection on a mirroring of their own identity on the screen. Moreover, we have investigated the kind of models of femininity Italian girls are most inspired by. In particular, we are of course also interested in understanding where they pick their inspiration, if they use media, social media, but also if they use also their parents or their families or the group of peers in order to be inspired also in terms of the kind of development they are going through during their adolescence. And finally, of course, as I mentioned before, we have involved also professionals from the field of cinema and television, because we are also interested in understanding the role Italian cinema in particular might play in girls' viewing experiences. As we know, of course, the cinema is not, especially cinema going, is not the most widespread activities, practices of consumption, of media consumption. Teenagers usually live, but at the same time we are interested in discovering if there are some elements that can attract them, or some stories or some characters in particular that can attract teenagers, and in particular these young girls of our research, in going to cinema and in watching movies, not only through the online platform. What we may say that the premise of these of all these goals and the premise for our research is of course also a series of transformation that are affecting in particular the television industry and the media industry in general, and in particular in the Italian case. In particular, we have focused our attention on this emergence of more male and female directed films about girlhood. So if we look at the last movies in the last few years, many of them are dedicated to girlhood. So girls are the very protagonist of the movies itself, and also the same happens in the television series. But at the same time, what we have seen and we have demonstrated also thanks to our results is that the exposure to Italian cinema is very limited among our interviewees because of the limits in the distribution patterns, and very often in accessing certain viewing platforms. At the same time, as we may image, also thanks to COVID pandemic and the transformation of the habits of teenagers, but also as an effect produced by the emergence of Netflix in the media ecosystem, the transformation of the habits of teenagers are also related to the emergence of a series of very famous and cult TV shows like Sex Education, Stranger Things, Never Have I Ever, etc. At the same time, we may say that also the Italian market is, thanks to, of course, this Netflix effect, is producing a series of new television shows dedicated to teenagers, starting from Baby, which was also the topic of our first research. So started this collaboration, studying Baby and the Italian girls' relationship with this representation of underage prostitution and television, but also series like Summertime, Zero, and also movies that are produced for television online platforms like Sul più bello, Anni da cane, etc. What is also important to notice is that thanks to this usage of online platforms, from the perspective of young audiences, there is no differences between film and television. There are no boundaries, and moreover, it's really interesting to discover also that there is a strong link between film and literature, that it's extremely present in the new content delivered by this platform. So in this sense, these novelties are changing also the way teenagers may address new content on television platforms. So here you have some example of the Italian production by Netflix and Amazon, the TV show Baby, I mentioned it before, Sul più bello and Anni da cane, that are television movies produced by Amazon. And in this case, of course, you can also see these that were still are very famous among adolescents. That are, of course, also the source of inspiration for a series of movies very appreciated by adolescents, like, for example, After, and also the Italian Succede and Sul più bello that I mentioned before. Another aspect, an important aspect of these new products that are characterizing the Italian cinema industry is also the usage of a series of, in this case, like L'Arminuta, or Mi chiedo quando ti mancherò, which is an international book, which is based on the process of growing up as adolescents and facing the particular problems and challenges of the adolescents. From a methodological point of view, here you can see what we are doing and what we are going to do. We have collected more than 80 qualitative interviews with girls between 14 and 19 years of age, and we collected these interviews using online platforms like Zoom or Meet, because we started the research during the pandemic. And of course, this is an element that we have also to consider in terms of possible bias of the research. But at the same time, what we have discovered is that during the pandemic, the adolescents in general, but we may say old people, started to socialize more thanks to these online platforms and the video call, etc. So what we we found was a general appreciation of this possibility to have these interviews with us, to spend time online with us, and they really also they were really participative and really engaged with the topic of the research. So the problem of having a screen or behind between us, it was not a problem. At the same time, we also decided to have a second step of the research in presence. So we visited all the schools from which the girls were selected, and in this case we spent usually 2 or 3 days in the schools organizing film screening and focus group reflecting on the representation of girlhood. The second step of the research was something that emerged during the research itself, in the sense that what we discovered was this, as I mentioned before, this strong participation, this strong enthusiasm, and also this sense of engagement with the topic we were discussing with them. So with Danielle, we decided to try also to experiment different way of engagement these girls, asking them to produce their own video about the content we were discussing about. So instead of just collecting their voice, what we decided to do was to give them the voice, so to make them the real protagonist of the research. And in this sense, we organized a video challenge where the girls were asked to produce a video essay about a film or TV show based, of course, on the female characters they appreciate the most. Finally, we are going to start the third part of the research. So we are going to visit again the schools starting from next December. And in this case, again, we would like to stress this idea of making the girls the real protagonists of the research, because we will ask them, and of course we will train them in doing their own interviews, engaging their mothers, older sisters, and female relatives, girlfriends, etc. So in this way, what we are going to collect are oral histories about the representation of adolescents among women of different generations. As I mentioned before, the possible bias we have faced with was first of all, the fact that we, of course, we conducted part of the research online, but in a sense, I think we may consider this problem as partially overcome by the situation. Of course, we have instead, which is most important, to consider that girls can be, in a sense, their habits can be transformed during the pandemic. So the kind of sociality they were used they used to have before the pandemic, and of course were probably different compared to the ones they told us during the interviews. So we have also to consider that sociality has changed a lot during the pandemic, and this is something that we may find in the interviews. And finally, again, the problem in addressing adolescents. Adolescents are a very difficult target for the interviews in general, for the research, but in this case, we may say that we found a very positive and enthusiastic atmosphere, and so we are very happy to go on with this research and working with the girls, and also with their teachers that are really engaged and who participate a lot and gave us a great contribution.
Thanks, Romana. Okay, so I was just going to focus, we were just going to focus on two aspects of that research that we've carried out. We've conducted an initial analysis of the transcripts from the interviews. So we've just begun by trying to identify some of the themes that emerged. And these include, of course, a focus on adolescence, gender, mothers, sisterhood, body, diversity. We've also asked questions about all of these things, so we've directed it towards these issues. So I'll expand on some of these here, not all of them. We hope to obviously build that into our research in the longer term and touch upon media consumption, social media use, everyday life, media representations of girlhood more broadly, and comparisons between cinema and TV content. But I think we're just going to focus on those themes on the left-hand side for today. And then we'll touch also upon the video essay. What we haven't done yet is analysed in any detail the focus group discussions or the screening discussions. We've got an awful lot of material to address, but some of those discussions inevitably will inform what we're going to say now about those initial areas. First of all, we have this focus on adolescence. As Romana was saying, there's very much a sense of loss, perhaps, on the part of these students, the sense that they were limited. So quite a lot of them did spend time discussing the ways that they couldn't do certain things because of the pandemic. Nonetheless, what emerges is, perhaps it's not nonetheless, but also because of this moment of calm and reflection. I don't know, that's something we need to think about it in a bit more depth, but this enforced solitude in some ways, there is an appearance of a balanced adolescence emerging from these girls. It's quite interesting. I know this was something that Romana and I commented on a lot, that often any lack of equilibrium is put in the past. And again, we're going to have to untangle exactly what that's about, but the scuola media seems to be the locus of a lot of anxiety in girlhood. So that's the age preceding, I think that's 12 to 14, isn't it, Romana? Often girls would feel that was a turbulent time, but by the time they've got to 14, there's a sense of a much greater balance being established, and very mature reflections on what adolescence means from many of these students. So one student describes it as an age of change. It shapes you, it's giving you what you need when you'll be an adult. Another describes it as a testing ground in order to learn to face things in the best way. That's the definition that they give. So we had some very interesting and mature definitions of what adolescence was, and a great deal of awareness of this as a time that would be challenging and a time of growth. Very little really about generational conflict, which is something that we'll come back to in a moment, but largely quite a strong sense of harmony between children and parents, children and teachers. So I think that's something interesting to reflect upon, how that's linked to media, for example, media consumption, how it might be linked to the pandemic itself as a time for families to spend more time together. Another element that's related to this, of course, is the mother-daughter relationship, which we did ask about specifically. We're trying to elicit here the background really to their consumption of figures of girlhood and femininity, and very often very positive stories about mother-daughter relationships. Mothers seen most frequently as inspirational figures. The word strong is used so many times in relation to mothers across these interviews. Mothers showing resilience and versatility. This reminded me, this is a finding that Romana and Leonardo identified in the research, but it reminded me of this kind of broader cultural critique of resilience as a trait that's seen to be typically feminine. So I'm thinking here of the work by Rosalind Gill and Shani Orgad on the idea, the sense that contemporary culture actually exerts pressure on women to be resilient. So that I think there's a kind of interesting overlap with our findings there that we need to investigate more. And certainly it's something that I feel in discussions with the interviewees easily be something that tips into a pressure upon girls to become strong and to be resilient. So there's an interesting dynamic at work there, but certainly there's very much a sense of a new model of a mother-daughter relationship, and one that we can see modeled for girls in many ways in contemporary media. So Romana selected there the example of 18 Regali, which is of course a story about a girl working out a relationship with her mother over time. But obviously texts like the Gilmore Girls, which are still around and very popular, are promoting that kind of dynamic between women. So it's something we see possibly feeding back from the media into girls' descriptions of their relations with a different generation. My mum is always close to me. I tell her everything. I tell her things some girls tend not to say. I tell her everything. She often gives me advice. So there was a lot of emphasis on mothers giving good advice, and not just mothers. Sometimes this would be extended to other family members, older sisters, aunts, and grandmothers. But this was a very strong theme emerging for us. When it comes to questions about gender, we got very different kinds of answer, actually. On some levels, there would be answers about that idealized gender equality, quite dismissive, it wasn't really an issue. But on others, very accurate perceptions of discrimination on a personal level. And girls suggesting here that there's no gender equality, that it's time to raise their voices. And often this could be linked to the existence of social media, I think, an awareness of feminist discourse on social media pages like, I think it's called Frida, isn't it, on Instagram? Am I thinking of the right one, Romana? I can't remember the Instagram page. Anyway, one where there's a regular kind of airing of feminist topics. And this then translates into an attachment to quite complex female protagonists. So girls who show strength, but also fragility and depth and solidarity. These are the characters that are most appreciated. So if we think about the research that Romana and I did already on Baby, it's very much that sense of a union of friendship between girls helping one another that takes the upper hand, but also girls who are troubled. I mean, the protagonists of Baby are two very troubled characters. And complex characters, and in this respect, of course, TV narratives have the upper hand, and it's often those characters inevitably that the girls are talking about in the most depth. But as we'll see, some of these translate back into their appreciation of certain kinds of film narratives as well. Romana, do interrupt me if you want to add anything, or I've missed anything in relation to this analysis. Thank you. So extending that discussion of friendship that emerges as an important aspect of girls' lives, that they form strong bonds with their female friends, that they see their female friends as a safety net, and as a consequence, female friendship in films and TV series is a topic that they appreciate a lot. Now, we've seen that on a kind of transnational level emerging in the work of Elena Ferrante. That was not, in fact, mentioned that often by our respondents. And maybe if we have time later, we can talk a little bit about that, because we did do a screening of an episode of My Brilliant Friend, and there was quite a strong response from the girls in regard to that. But it's not the most common text in which context in which they're talking about female friendship, but it certainly emerges as an important element of their appreciation of media. So Scam, for example, I think would be a much clearer example of a series in which which they value the centrality of female friendship, the fundamental role that the girlfriends play. Girlfriends tend to understand, being what they underline in their interviews. Body, we touched upon this with a question in our interviews, but it also came up spontaneously in our focus groups, and there's a very strong response there about the ways in which they're experiencing rapid change and unease in relation to that change. And it's there that most frequently the awareness about gender issues and feminism emerge. So a lot of them talk about catcalling, about feeling self-conscious about what they're wearing, and how they're looking. So we see that quote at the bottom, don't be too short, too tall, or about clothes, a style that's a bit different, is immediately criticised. And they came back to this quite repeatedly in focus groups. And inevitably, the social media emerges there as a platform that may enhance this sense of pressure and surveillance, but it's not limited to social media. In fact, I remember quite a lengthy discussion with girls in a location near Milan about public transport and awareness of surveillance on public transport. So one of the films that we discussed with them in this context was the film Dolcissime, which is a recent film, Italian film, that's addressing these particular body issues, particularly around this idea of being perceived to be overweight. And some of the girls actually picked up on that film for their video essay. So it's a way in which, I'll come to talk about the video essay in a minute, but it's a way in which the video essay shows the kinds of themes that they're attracted to discussing further. The final element that came up that I just wanted to add in here in terms of kind of bodies and representation was in relation to questions of diversity. They frequently comment on how much they appreciate visions of diversity. So I mentioned Dolcissime there as an opportunity to see girls who are not conforming to a certain body shape. We ask them sometimes to bring clips in from their favorite TV series. Many of them picked the figure of Sana from Scam Italia. So they were fascinated by and repeatedly said they wanted to see more of this kind of protagonist on Italian television and in the location of Italy. I think they are aware. It was interesting that they always cited Sanna and not the character of Summer from Summertime, although most of them have seen that series as well. So I think they are aware of these issues being taken more or less seriously by a programme. I think it's Kristen Warner who talks about plastic diversity, and we get a kind of plastic visibility of difference, I think, in Summertime, where the lead protagonist really has a very, her background is unclear, and so it seems to be more of a kind of Benetton style arrangement of diversity, whereas the series, the season that's dedicated to Sana, gives girls and viewers the sense that they're getting more of an insight into the experiences of a Muslim girl living in Italy. So they really appreciated that and showed a hunger for more of that kind of material, which was interesting. So just moving on to discuss the next stage of our research. Romana, if you want to come in and talk about this, please do just wave. But Romana mentioned that the brief on this was for us to ask small groups of girls to use clips or images together with voiceover and possibly music and text to convey their own response to a particular female protagonist. Now we didn't leave it completely open. We did give them a suggested list, and this list was limited to largely Italian cinema. So it was also a kind of experiment in thinking about raising awareness of Italian cinema and seeing what happened when they might be exposed to films they hadn't seen, which was interesting, particularly for some of those questions we raised at the beginning, like what do girls make of films about girls that they're not necessarily getting to see? And what emerged was largely a very positive response to this kind of girl-focused Italian cinema, much of it unknown to them. And it picks up on some of those themes that we've outlined above, and the focus on body shame, for example, came out very strongly through their analysis of Dolcissime. Some of the best videos that were made were about that experience of the girls in water. So the film Dolcissime is clearly about this group of girls learning to become synchronized swimmers. And there was a lot of focus on the idea of the body in water and how it might feel like a kind of freedom for girls to be in water. So there's kind of quite a strong affective response on the parts of these girls to that kind of story. A great fascination or attraction to social structures of sexual or gendered restriction or subservience. So the recent Rai television series Mare Fuori, which is in particular a Romani girl called Nadica, who emerged as a popular character amongst many of our respondents, popular for her strength and her strength in combating adverse circumstances relating to her gender. So there's an attempt on the part of her family to arrange a marriage for her, and her resilience and rebellion against that is very clear. A Chiara was another recent film about a girl who encounters the 'Ndrangheta, the Calabrian mafia. She finds out her father is a member of that mafia. So again, it's her resistance at following that kind of family model. So but one that's also very gendered. So once again, it's the attraction of that kind of rebellion and strength that we've been talking about. And in general, resilience on a lighter note is something that's very much celebrated. Many of the students picked the film Sul più bello, we suspect because they already knew it, and so there's that kind of attraction to the familiar. If I were doing this again, I might be tempted to perhaps try to eliminate the ones that were most familiar, because otherwise you end up with the majority picking it. But maybe there's an argument that certain students will be more willing to participate if they have a film that they really love, and that told us a lot about Sul più bello and why they liked it. And in fact, the example that I'd like to share with you, if we have time, Olga, the first prize winner of our contest was focusing on Sul più bello, and it was interesting to see what they did with that. We might also suggest that while Sul più bello is a romantic film, it's a rom-com, it fits into that genre of the sick girl film. So it's about a girl who's got a very serious illness, but falls in love and kind of fights to keep that love alive. About this attraction to that kind of film, I think we might suggest that betrays an anxiety about the future and how to be strong in the face of that future. I think those two things perhaps go hand in hand. But our prize winner, interestingly, without our prompting them, points towards the next phase of our research. It also, I think, challenges the terrain, the first phase of our research, because this particular group of participants really wanted to include male peers' voices in the video, which I thought was interesting, and it's something that we've discussed at length and shared with other colleagues as well, thinking about how moving forwards one might do research that also includes male voices about girlhood. That some of these participants felt very much that they wanted male viewers to be involved in the discussion. We had avoided that from the outset because we thought it might inhibit discussion. So I think it would be interesting to think about models of research that might do both, that might create spaces that feel safe for discussion of issues relating particularly to girlhood, but then also in some ways incorporate male voices. We did that to a certain extent by opening some of the screenings to male viewers, which they participated in with great delight. and were very eager to tell us what they thought about those films. But it's something that we would like to explore further in the future. Olga, do you think it would be possible as a kind of final note for us to share this?
Of course,
link?
yes. We have other 8-10 minutes.
Well, that would be perfect, but let's just see whether it actually works, because sometimes I know that the feedback through Zoom on a video can be awkward. So just interrupt me if it doesn't work, and we can just refer people to our website. It's on our website anyway, but it would be nice to share it now if we might. So let's see what happens.
In the meantime, I invite the audience to type their questions for later. Otherwise, you can just raise your virtual hand and we will invite you to talk when Danielle and Romana will have finished. Thank you.
Lei è Marta, solare, determinata, divertente e di una spiccata simpatia, carattere forte e travolgente, ha tanta voglia di fare.
Sono Marta, è una ragazza molto allegra, vivace, è molto determinata, si vede anche nel lavoro.
La protagonista mi è sembrata molto autoironica, è sempre sorridente, si approccia anche in un modo molto sereno a quello che le capita. Mi piacerebbe anche a me avere quella forza di andare avanti nonostante tutto.
Sa farsi amare e soprattutto anche lo si vede anche nel lavoro che fa, ci mette tutta la sua vivacità, tutto il suo entusiasmo.
Il suo futuro è segnato da una rara malattia genetica che le fa vivere il presente con la paura di non riuscire a godersi appieno il tempo che le rimane.
Ecco, forse il punto centrale del film, dal mio punto di vista, è stato proprio questo: affrontare la malattia non in vista della morte, ma in vista della vita fino a che ci sarà. Ecco. Mi sono ritrovata proprio perché in molte situazioni della mia vita anch'io ho guardato il bicchiere mezzo pieno.
Lei sa di essere malata, però non sta lì a pensare a quanto è sfortunata, ma si gode lo stesso la vita.
Mi è sembrato che venisse trattata un po' con leggerezza, nel senso che giustamente non si è insistito troppo su quello. Quindi la malattia a volte è uno sfondo ad altro.
Per fortuna ci sono gli amici. Jacopo non è alla moda, Jacopo è la moda. E fin da piccolo la sua missione era chiara: combattere il cattivo gusto. Se la chiami Fede, ti dà una testata. Ha fatto coming out quando aveva 13 anni.
Bene, mi sono messa con Anna.
Il rapporto tra Marta e i suoi due amici mi ha colpito, nel senso che nonostante le loro stravaganze erano sempre al fianco di questa amica in difficoltà.
I suoi amici sono veramente suoi amici, tanto da abbandonare tutto per vivere con lei.
Credo che loro vivano veramente l'amicizia, lo si vede quando soprattutto vogliono condividere con lei momenti di dolore.
È uno dei primi film italiani in cui si parla dell'omosessualità senza pregiudizi. Negli amici lei ritrova i propri genitori.
All'inizio cercava l'amore come un divertimento, un passatempo, ma poi incontra Arturo, bello, determinato e dal fascino irresistibile, e con lui quello che sembrava un gioco diventa presto amore.
Ma la loro storia è molto bella, l'apparenza appunto non è bella, non è ricca, non è niente, ma aveva qualche cosa di particolare, di magico quasi, che l'ha fatto innamorare.
Ma Marta è davvero una ragazza forte e sicura di sé?
Beh, non è così. Presto fa emergere quelle che sono le sue due più grandi insicurezze.
Avete presente tutte quelle storie che si raccontano alle bambine? Tipo che il brutto anotroccolo un giorno diventerà cigno e che i bruchi alla fine si trasformano in farfalle? Beh, io alla fine sono rimasta bruco.
Queste insicurezze la portano ad allontanare il suo grande amore.
La verità è che tu sei innamorato di me. E che invece no.
solitamente la sicurezza nasconde un sacco di fragilità.
Secondo me le insicurezze di Marta sono principalmente nella malattia e si vede quando lei lascia Turo.
L'insicurezza è un problema che prende tutti i ragazzi, soprattutto in questa fase della vita, e anche io ci ritrovo spesso dentro.
Un pochino mi ci sono ritrovata, nel senso che ricordo in quegli anni anch'io di essere stata molto insicura per altri motivi e talvolta anche adesso, per cui sì, sicuramente è un aspetto che ritrovo anche nel mio carattere.
Ma grazie ai suoi amici riflette e capisce qual è stato il suo errore.
Non volevo che ti sentissi costretto a restare con me solo perché sono malata.
Perché tanto decidi tutto tu, no?
Sto solo cercando di renderti la cosa più facile. Il dottore mi ha appena detto che la situazione sta degenerando rapidamente. Potrei andarmene proprio sul più bello.
Okay, thank you for watching that. I apologize to people who don't speak Italian. We're getting somebody to subtitle the video essays at the moment, so they will be available on our site with English subtitles, but hopefully that gave you enough of the gist of the kinds of images and storyline that attract the girls, and also the ways in which they wove other voices into that narrative, which I think was quite interesting and points to, I think, what hopefully will be a continued enthusiasm in their participation in the second phase of the project, which is finding out about other experiences of girlhood and other views on girlhood itself. So thank you Federica and Olga for this opportunity. We look forward to hearing any questions.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Romana, for your really brilliant presentation. It was super interesting. If anyone has questions, you can raise your virtual hand and we're going to invite you to speak. You can also use the chat if you don't want to talk directly, and we're going to read your question to our speakers. So I'll leave you a couple of minutes to think about it. In the meantime, I'd love to start asking one thing to our speakers. This is concerning the group you involved for your project. You said it was a group of 80 girls, and I was wondering whether within these girls, some of them were from the south, some of them were from the north of Italy, some from big cities, some others from small towns, and if so, did you find any differences among these girls, considering the geographical positions, and if so, which were the most striking differences in relation to what they saw?
Sorry, Romana, do you want to say something?
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's the same. You can start.
Okay, well, I'll start and then you take over. But sorry, first of all, Olga, I meant to say this was a kind of very broad, undifferentiated response, because we've just started analysing this data. We are able to break it down. We have the information to break it down in terms of social background, more specifically relating to age and to location. So how I answer this and how Romana answers this now, I think, will still be quite impressionistic at the moment. But certainly I would say, yes, there were differences. Differences emerging, for example, in relation to the kinds of text types that they might find more attractive. So it was very clear, for example, that Mare Fuori, that series that's located in a juvenile prison in Naples, was much more popular with schools in the south of Italy than it was with schools in the north, for example. So certainly an attraction to locations that might reflect their own was quite clear. I think Possibly also those areas where there was a greater ethnic diversity. I think there tended to be more discussion of the need to see those kinds of characters on screen. So yes, there's certainly ways in which we can relate it quite specifically to the local context. Yeah, Romana, would you like to say more about that?
Yeah, just to add something related to, of course, what we discovered as a main difference is about also the kind of consumption practices when it comes to, for example, the leisure activities they have outside their home, in the sense, of course, that it depends on the opportunities they have in their city, on the place where they live, etc. So in many cases we found differences in this sense, and maybe yes, I totally agree, Danielle, about this the sense of mirroring with some content that can be perceived as more closer than others, especially Mere Fuori. We have to say that we had interviews in the south of Italy when Mare Fuori became a success in Italy. So of course, what is really, really important is that this research is continuously a work also for us in terms of updating our knowledge about the content, because as you may imagine, considering the platform, the online platform, content emerges continuously, and what we found as a common aspect in the interviews is that they are very focused on the present. I mean, they are very focused on the last content they have watched. So in this sense, we have to, according to the time we had the interviews, we found also some differences in this sense. And but for about the and also some differences are related not only in terms of the typology of cities where they live, while it's more interesting to notice the kind of school they are attended, in the sense that in some cases the high school, the more traditional high school like Liceo Scientifico and Liceo Classico, may have a different kind of the girls can have a different kind of approach to the topic we have presented, and they seem more, in some cases they seem more conscious, more political engaged, etc., while in other cases they can be less interested in this topic. But in terms of the content that are interesting for us, in terms of the relationship with the body, relationship with friends, relationship with also mothers, we find very, very big similarities among the girls, and this is an interesting point, I think.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read Shirley's question. She says, thanks for your presentation. And she says, I wonder whether you could say something more about the ways the participants discussed mother-daughter relationships. I found that very interesting. And were there divergences of view on this, she asks.
I don't recall there being that many, and obviously that we might put that down perhaps to a reticence in young women describing their relationships with their mothers as difficult. Occasionally that, rather like the middle school discourse, a difficulty of relationship with the mother could be put in the past, I noticed. But Romana, what do you remember? I don't remember coming across many cases where there was a great divergence from that narrative of strength and resilience.
No, there were not, in the sense that what was very curious is that, oh, sorry.
Okay, that's Romana's dog. So we'll just need dogs to calm down. Yes, and we'll wait to hear what her curious comment was. But Maybe we should take another question in the meantime. Oh, Shirley says dogs are welcome, Romana. So just
I can see that
talk to us.
there is a question from the audience, from Sean. You're invited, yes, to unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
Thank you. Thank you for this webinar, and I'm really excited about the continuation of this, the research on this topic. I'm actually in San Francisco. I teach a course called Literature of the Child. So it's a course focused on childhood in literature. And I use global texts, and I teach it to first-year students, so first-year college students. And I'm very, very interested in this topic. And I really was curious about a few things that you brought up in your talk, but I think I'll focus on maybe one. And I think you started to talk about it just a minute ago, the idea of middle school as being the most sort of challenging time. I think middle school is scuola media. I'm not sure. I might be off. Is that right? Middle school, yeah. For me, that's very, very interesting, just reflecting on my own life and my girlfriends' lives, and seeing how this age between sort of childhood and adulthood or adolescence is so problematic, to say the least. And I'm curious if you have any more to say about middle school, and was that surprising to you that came out? Yeah, whatever you want to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. I'm sure Romana will chip in even when she wants to, but I think it was surprising to me the consistency with which that came up. And the two things I would note, no, maybe three, that body shame would often be located in that period, or awkwardness about the body, bullying, experiences of bullying, and also not being able to handle social media. I would say for me, those three things came up a lot in that kind of context. Again, it was interesting how the not being able to handle social media was put often, not always, but often put by older girls into the past. That middle school was a period when it was difficult for them, and that they'd found ways of dealing with it. And I mean, I have to say, and this extends a little bit further to media use, I was incredibly impressed by the ways in which many of them described their media management. They manage it a lot better than I do, I can tell you that. But it would be instances like some of them would not watch TV series during term time because they knew that if they started watching a TV series, they would get hooked and they wouldn't be able to stop watching it. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. Sorry, I think Romana's added a comment in the chat about motherhood. Yes, that some of the consistency of these discourses. Yes, one was the idealization of the mother. Yeah, and another one was, I think, the placing of problems back in middle school. Again, that might be something to think about in terms of how that might be linked to the pandemic, because of course some of those problems were removed by the pandemic, perhaps, but not all. I mean, in some respects, social media pressure could be perceived to increase. I hope that answers your question, Sean. And your course on literature of the child sounds fascinating. I think that book, La Minuta, that we mentioned in our presentation, which is it Donatella di Pietrantonio? That would be really interesting to you. It has been translated into English.
Are there any more questions? Yes, Shirley?
I was really interested in the modeling of your research. I thought it was so thorough and so well thought through. And one of the things that struck me was that, you said that the girls wanted to have their male peers involved in giving you some feedback. And I wondered what the rationale, I found that really interesting too. And I wondered what the rationale was that they gave for thinking that might be interesting or a good idea.
Thanks, Shirley. Yes, this was something they said to me at least 3 times, and it was a very particular group of girls, but they they were quite insistent about it, and I think their reasoning was that that if they didn't involve their male peers in some of the discussions that we were having about girlhood, then things wouldn't change. So I think it was quite a kind of interventionist and proactive vision of how they might talk to their male peers, but not in it was in an interested way, that they wanted them to join in the conversation. It wasn't I didn't perceive it in any way as aggressive. And I mean, I think that comes across in the video that they've made. They've just, found this peer that also likes sul più bello, and I think part of it is them wanting to destigmatize what's perceived to be kind of girl media. So that could very much be a motivation there, that I think would be great. And certainly when we showed a romantic comedy in the school in Calabria, that provoked discussion amongst the boys about their own relationships. So there was very clearly a perceived need to talk about those issues on the part of boys as well. So yes, this kind of debate that media provokes about gender, possibly also about relationships, is something that some of the girls want to include the boys in, and that the boys very much want to participate in too. So if I were to, I've said this already, I think, to some colleagues, but if I were to redesign this research, I think I would have done it slightly differently and had another stage in which the girls were talking to their male peers. And it's still possible that might emerge in this second phase. That we're keeping the emphasis on talking to older women, but if they desperately wanted to involve a male peer, I don't think we would oppose that. So we could create a little space for it, but I think it would have to be much more programmatic in the future. Yeah. I suppose I actually had one boy ask me why he couldn't participate, and I felt quite badly about it because he clearly wanted to, and I had to kind of revisit my original reasons, which were of course thinking about the exclusion of girls and women from the Italian cinematic apparatus, which is a historical problem, but of course it's not something that a teenage boy perceived. He just sees himself being shut out of the conversation. So yeah, that definitely revised our views on that, and I know Romana will have views on that as well.
Yeah, of course. I would like also to add something. I mean, the issue that surprised us was that boys asked us to do a research on them. So it was really, really curious, and of course, this made us think about the of course the goal of our projects, and also forced us in thinking about the adolescence from the boys' perspective, which is really, really interesting in my opinion at the moment. So what I think is that also girls are interested in understanding boys. So this is why they want to involve them in the interviews or in the project, because sometimes they don't have a clear idea of boys, especially because boys they don't have a clear idea of themselves. So sometimes talking with them was really interesting to find they use a series of stereotypical images, stereotypical representation of boys in a sense, but then they find different, they have different opinions. So they don't understand boys at the moment. So I think the problem is that they, girls have this attitude to talk, to share their emotions, their feelings with their friends, while boys they usually don't have these opportunities and this attitude, and in the sense they are more difficult to understand. So they want to involve them in order to start a connection to understand they. So it's I think it's a good topic also to reflect on boyhood, especially because, as Danielle said, of course, we have a series of, we are aware and conscious about the problems related, especially in Italy, with female representation in also behind the camera, no? And this is why we also work a lot with the media industry and with professionals, because of course the problem is that not so many stories were told because there was a lack of women behind the cameras also. But the problem is also that this is something that, of course, is not perceived as a topic by adolescents, while they perceive this general situation of uncertainties that they are living, and I think boys are in a bad situation, in the sense that more problematic situation than girls, because they don't have the tools to share, to talk, etc., compared to girls.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions from the audience? If I may, I would like to jump into this discussion, the last bit of discussion we've been having, because I wonder whether the introduction of a more gender fluid perspective would broaden the discussion that we are just having. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the very latest release of Amazon Prime, Prisma, where we really see this beautiful representation of two twin brothers, one of whom is a gender fluid, is exploring his gender identity, and he is extremely attracted to the idea of girlhood, of transforming himself into a girl, in a sense. And while preserving his masculine identity, his masculine traits, so heightening them in order to align to a representation of girlhood that is most even stereotypical and stereotypically reproduced in social media. And we see him use quite a lot the social media as a means of expressing and communicating his girlhood that is otherwise in reality, in real life. And it's interesting because the series by the same creator of Scam Italia. So once I've been reading interviews that he's been given, and he says that he wants to differentiate the product from what Scam was, and introducing a new perspective into it. So I wonder whether your own research has accounted for those more gendered fluid realities of representation.
It's such a good question, Federica. I think it was difficult for us to know how to take that into account. Certainly, it didn't happen, but we did make it clear when setting up the discussion groups with teachers that if there were people in that position, then they would be very welcome to join us. We didn't want it to be a kind of exclusionary model of girlhood. We didn't find that to be the case. Although actually in a pilot study there was one instance, but that was absolutely fine. But it's interesting that it wasn't the case, and yeah, one does wonder whether that's an institutional issue or a national discourse around gender fluidity. It's so interesting that it's in this moment that Prisma is coming out. And also, was it L'Immensità, the film that's just released?
Yeah, exactly. Realize's latest movie. Yes.
So
exactly.
Yes, it really seems to be the moment for this discussion to be emerging, and perhaps it's something that Romana and I need to discuss in terms of thinking about the second phase of the project, which gives us another opportunity to revisit these issues from a slightly different angle. So yeah, thank you, Federica. I think Romana has been watching that show. I haven't seen it yet, but
it's wonderful.
Yeah,
very exciting.
I am watching. I am in the very middle of the TV show, but of course, yeah, the topic is is really interesting, and it's a novelty for Italian television, of course. And now I would like to say that during the interviews we try to focus not on gender fluidity or on differences in gender orientation, etc. And but I think that in general that topic was not addressed wide during the interviews in a very deep way. I mean, they don't reflect a lot on this. Of course, we know that in the last few TV shows, I mean, also in the Italian ones, the homosexuality, for example, is addressed, starting from Baby, or also Scam, of course, and but also Mare Fuori and other the Summertime, etc. So this is a topic that's starting to be in the agenda of adolescents, while gender fluidity is more, I think, is more present in their experiences online, because it's very common to find this kind of, for example, this kind of experimentations in terms of gender representation on social media, on TikTok in particular. So some of the elements of Prisma may resonate with that kind of gender fluidity representation that we can find on TikTok at the moment. So maybe it is something very new for our audiences, I mean, for adolescents, maybe in general. But it's a really interesting topic. Yeah.
Sorry. I wonder how things will change, how like the representation, the perception on the same like groups that you interviewed might be changing as we're speaking, in the sense that the series has just been released. How many of those who perhaps didn't consider themselves as experimenting with their gender identity might see something that would click in that particular representation that is more mainstream than others. And also the fact that the product is dubbed and is fully dubbed and is subtitled in English and other languages makes it a really global product.
I'm just jumping into this conversation very briefly from the screen to the page. I think that on the topic of gender fluidity, Italy did a very big step forward in the discourse by assigning the renowned Strega Prize, the most important literary prize in Italy, to an author like Mario Desiati, who wrote the novel Spatriati, published by Einaudi, which is the first novel with the two gender fluid protagonists that enters the Italian mainstream in literature. So I think this is a very good moment for Italian cultural products in terms of diversity and gender representation. So thank you so much for addressing that, Federica, again, and thank you, Romana and Danielle, for your presentation and for your answers. I think our time is almost up, so I would take advantage to again say thank you for being with us, to everyone, our speakers and the audience, the people who were with us for this first event, for the launch of our series of seminars. We are very excited to move on to the next talks in the future weeks. You are very welcome to give a look to the program on the seminars page.